Hi, everybody. This is Christy Lee with Law Offices of Christy Lee. I have offices in Alaska and Hawaii and Texas, and I'm here today to talk more about the PPP program. So I changed the title to Why is Getting Your PPP Loan Forgiveness the Least of Your Worries? I was going to give you a seminar about how to make sure that your loan is forgiven, right? That's what I've been focusing on all this time, is to get the loan forgiven. How do you do the payroll? How do you make sure that you have allocated the payroll appropriately? If you have employees over 100,000, how do you make sure that you have full-time equivalent, all that stuff. But then some stuff went down and I decided I was going to change the seminar. But before we get started, a few things. One, we've got the Q&A on the left-hand side that you can write questions. I have a lot of questions that have been sent to me. I've promised I'm addressing those in this seminar. And then to the right, there's also chat. You can raise your hand or something, and you can put emails, sorry, not emails, but questions into that as well. But before we get started, I have to say it, that I am not your lawyer. This is not legal advice unless you're my client and I have talked to you in detail about your own case. This is not legal advice. Somebody always ruins it for everybody, just like the reason why I'm doing this seminar right now. So I want to get started with some slides. And if you look at the first slide, I received this last week, and it was an email from Alaska Department of Labor, and it stated basically that they take fraud very seriously. And if an individual obtains benefits through fraud, then they're going to be ineligible for benefits, and have to repay the money, and could be subject to criminal prosecution. And they say here that if an individual refuses an offer, so what that means is your employee, you call them up, just like the Washington business that I read an article about, who was a nail salon, and she had to lay off all of her employees, called them up to say, hey, I have the PPP money, come on back. They all were really mad at her and said, we don't want to come back. We're making more money if we are on unemployment. So I don't know if this was why the Alaska Department of Labor did it, but they came back and said, if an employee refuses an offer of work because unemployment insurance pays more than their weekly wage, is asking to be laid off, or requests to have their hours reduced so they can collect unemployment benefits, they may be committing fraud, and please contact us. I wasn't really too concerned about that. And then I received this. Again, not too concerned about it, because here's the question. Do businesses owned by large companies with adequate sources of liquidity to support the business's ongoing operation qualify for PPP? Well, we all know what that was about, right? That was the Shake Shack, Harvard, who has a $1 billion endowment. The Lakers have asked for money. I think actually received money. We've got Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. People have been really up in an uproar because they're like, hey, that's not small business. Small business is the nail salon that had to shut down, or the massage person who can't, or the masseuse who can't do the massage, or the restaurant that can't give out food. Just that is really what you think of when you think of this PPP program. So then after I received this, right, you look at it and the question goes into that certification process where you say, yes, I'm certifying that the current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. Remember, you had to tick that box, or initial, I'm not sure which one, that says, hey, you have to certify that you're nervous, there's something going on with the COVID-19 and you can get money. But then they put this out for the big businesses, and it actually says, hey, by the way, if you have access to other sources of liquidity sufficient to support your ongoing operations, then you can't get this money, right? And you need to pay it back. And I wasn't too worried about it. Then I get this, another safe harbor. What is a safe harbor with request to certification? And I'm like, okay, again, that certification we just talked about, right? That you had to check when you received your loan, or when you're doing the application. My current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations. But look at what it says next. Any borrower. No, so we're no longer talking at all about the Lakers or Shake Shack. We're talking about anybody. We're one or two people that are in your business. Any borrower that applies for a PP loan prior to the issuance of this regulation and repays it in full by May 7th, you will be deemed to have certified it in good faith. I'm like, ruh-roh, that's making me nervous. Then I get this. So yesterday, I get that Muchin, the Treasury Secretary, says relief loans over $2 million will be audited. And again, they say, if you return these loans by May 7th without penalty, you're not going to be in trouble, right? And again, I think to myself, it's those people that are in trouble, right? So that was yesterday, boring myself to death on the presentation I was going to do. Then I get a call from an IRS agent that I've been dealing with, a revenue agent. That's an auditor with the IRS. So I've been dealing with the IRS for many, well, gosh, I don't know. I don't say how many years, but I've been dealing with the IRS for a long time. But during COVID-19, 50% of their staff are not working. Almost 100% are at home. So they're at home, but this is the complaints they're giving me. One, I have to continue doing my audits. You can't send it to my home because I don't want you to know where I live. So you have to send it to my office. And I don't get to go to my office to go pick up your stuff. Okay, well, great. So all of my audits are in an absolute standstill. But I received this call from the auditor saying, hey, we want to continue the audit, and I want you to send me all the original documents through the mail. Well, that ain't going to happen. I mean, that's just dumb. So I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm also not going to photocopy everything because that's an undue burden, not going to happen. So she just starts to vent and says to me, oh my gosh, I have to work. I have to do all this work. 50% of the IRS employees have been told, don't even work. Great. So as a taxpayer, I'm thrilled that 50% of government employees with the IRS are not even working. So she says to me, oh, and we were just informed today that we are going to audit 100% of every single PPP loan. And I said, oh, really? Because I just read you were going to do the 2 million over. And she said, no, it's all of them. And then she goes off to say how ridiculous that is, because if it's only $5,000, that's just not going to be, that's going to be such a waste of her time, blah, blah, blah. So I panicked and thought, well, might want to change my webinar because I think my clients would like to know what would constitute fraud, because that's what they're looking for, right? So what's going to happen is you receive the loan through the bank. The bank then is going to be the one to determine if you are forgiven for their purposes. But then guess what? Is it over? No, it's not over. The problem we still have is that it is going to then go to the IRS. Then I decided to say, how do you commit fraud in the PPP program, right? And one is when you sign that application, did you commit fraud when you said, yes, I swear that everything on here is true and correct and that the current economic situation is stressing me out, right? That's one. Two, did you use the loan money for other things besides the allowed expenses? And three, which I wrote all these. Three, did you do dumb shit? So we're going to go through what that means. The first one, I have a lot of business owners. That's what we represent. Right? That's what my firm does. I mean, we are trusted business advisors. We protect business owners from the IRS. And I'm telling you, there's not one business that I represent I could even think would have signed that application fraudulently. Okay, so I'm not saying that yours isn't done fraudulently, but I'm just saying mine. I don't see it. The number two one is, did you not use it for allowable expenses? Well, let's talk about what does that mean. Say, for example, like myself, when I received my loan, they put it into a checking account because I had to go to a different bank, Northrem, because my bank told me to go, well, just absolutely ignored me. I'd open an account there. Well, I have no checks. Well, because of COVID-19, I couldn't go in to get checks. So I had to order them. Well, guess where they took the money out of? They took $28.35 out of my checking account. Is that fraud? No, that's not fraud. Is it an unallowable expense? That is correct. And have I paid through my other account $28.35 back into Northrem? Yes, I did, right? But what would be considered an unallowable expense? Well, one would be you're a restaurant and you decide that you don't have any money, and even though you've paid all your employees, you now are going to buy groceries or you're going to buy the food out of that money. That is an unallowable expense. Is that fraud? That's not fraud. I mean, you're not being bad, right? I mean, you're just stupid, but that's not bad. Say for the payroll that you decided, well, for payroll, I'm going to include life insurance premiums that I have to pay as part of payroll. Is that an allowable expense? No. Was that fraud? No. Are you going to have to pay back that money? Yes. But what if you go and you put in a pool? Yeah, that's fraud. You know, that's not right. What if you tell your, let's just say a friend of yours, hey, I'll tell you what, I have to have another employee and I don't have one, so I'm going to put you on payroll and you're not going to work for me. And then when this is all over, you're going to just give me back the cash. Well, that's fraud. What if you go and you talk to your landlord and you say, hey, by the way, you're a good landlord, I'm a good tenant, and I want to pay you through the PPP program my rent payments. But it states I have to have a lease agreement as of February 15th, 2020, and I don't have one. Why don't we just create one? Which is legit, right? Why don't we just create one? And then we can backdate it so I can use it and you can get paid. Well, that's fraud, right? I mean, that's fraud. So the other one is, did you do dumb shit? And I mean, now we're getting into like, are you so stupid that you should be on the news? Now, I don't know everything about the Lori Loughlin and the Varsity Blues thing, but if it's true that she took photos of her kids in a, what is that, you know, a rowing machine, took photos, gave it to a person, paid them $500,000 or paid the school $500,000 to get her kids in because they couldn't get into the school on academics alone. And so they were going to be able to get in for rowing, to be on the rowing crew. That's fraud. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that's all true. I'm just saying if that is true, that's fraud. That's why she's being prosecuted. Other dumb stuff, like I just said, also in there would be, oh, I've decided I forged my documents. So I lied. Like I said that here's my utility bills and here's a canceled check, but the canceled check really isn't to the utilities. It was to yourself, but you don't think anybody's ever going to find out, right? Those things are really, really, really stupid. All right, so those are my ideas of what fraud is. Now, I wanted to go through the definitions, even though they are just a tad bit boring. Fraud is a knowing misrepresentation of the truth or concealment of a material fact to induce another to act to his or her detriment. What does that mean? Because that's like really boring. Well, a knowing misrepresentation is I went and had my landlord sign a fraudulent lease. And so I take that lease and I put it in my documentation. I give it to the bank and say, look, I had a lease. That's fraud. You knowingly are misrepresenting yourself. And guess to whose detriment? Well, the bank forgave you. So the bank's not getting their 1% interest. Then also to the detriment of the government, because the government now has money that just went down the toilet. And you can even go so far as the taxpayer, because who do you think's going to have to come up with all this money? Right? So that, you know, fraud, I will say, is hard to get. But then we also have a thing called constructive fraud. And this one scares me. This is unintentional deception or misrepresentation that causes injury to another. Ruh-roh. I mean, that's unintentional deception. That means you didn't even mean to do it. But I had somebody ask me this. Please talk about how to address the loan proceeds on a tax return. Well, let's talk about criminal tax fraud. The willful evasion of taxes accompanied by filing a fraudulent tax fraud. How do you file a fraudulent tax return? How do you file one? Remember, I said earlier, I sign that under penalty of perjury. I swear everything is true and correct, right? I swear everything is true and correct to the best of my knowledge. Well, if now you take that lease that you lied about and you put those payments on your return and you say, hey, these now are payments on my return, even though you made the payments, you still committed fraud. Now, there's a big, huge debate about if it's forgiven, is it considered a grant, meaning the income you received. So let's say you receive $100,000 and $100,000 is forgiven. You've been super awesome. You listened to my webinars, you've listened to other webinars, did your own research, and you determine all of it's forgiven. Well, that is something up for debate right now. We're going to talk more about it. If you say that $100,000 was a grant, then anything that you've paid out of that $100,000 will not be on your tax return, which also somewhat causes an accounting. It just gets to be a little bit annoying with the accounting, but that's just an idea of criminal tax fraud. Then I received this, right? This is another reg. Can lenders rely on borrower documentation for loan forgiveness? And it says, yes, the lender does not need to conduct any verification if the borrower submits documentation. So what that means is the lender's not going to go verify that you aren't a big fat liar. I mean, they're not going to go and say, I want canceled checks. If you show them your utility bill and say, hey, here is my bank statement that says that I had paid check number 45 is for $145, and that's what the bill is for the phone bill, they're not going to verify that. But that doesn't mean it goes away. You're still going to be audited. But here's another question. Do I have to give documentation to the lender on how I spent the money if I don't want the loan forgiven? Yep, you still have to do it. This is not just about forgiveness. You still have to provide that you didn't do something stupid like go build a pool. Another question, what happens if the PPP loans are misused? So the Small Business Administration, more regs, they say if you knowingly use the funds for unauthorized purposes, you'll be subjected to charges of fraud. So it does say, that's knowingly, so that's really good. SBA will direct you to repay any amounts that are unauthorized. But if you knowingly did it, then that is fraud and you're going to be prosecuted. Does the cost of a house, stipend, or an allowance provided to an employee as part of a compensation count towards payroll cost? Yes. This is not really about fraud, but this is a brand new reg that came out, and I thought it was interesting that if you have somebody who makes more than $100,000 and their annual compensation, you also have to include housing stipends and allowance. Like all of that together is $100,000. Question, we received money April 20th. I used old money to pay payroll on April 19th. New payroll ends on May 3rd. Should I pay on May 3rd, even though it's a Sunday? No, you don't have to pay May 3rd. I mean, I just want to say pay Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever. That just needs to be your pay period. We don't want you to have to come in on a Sunday and have to do that. Question, we are an S corporation. Owner is getting payroll, salary, and under $100,000. However, the look back period from, it would be February 15th to June 30th, 2019, he was not taking payroll. Is it okay to pay 8 weeks of his salary on his annual pay for 2019? Absolutely. Excellent question. Question, if a wage is simply salary, meaning they don't have any health insurance or 401ks, gross amount is the amount to use, correct? Yes, the gross amount is the amount to use, and then you can add your employer, federal, and state unemployment portion. Question, in your opinion, will the SBA loan stick to the rules of forgiveness? In 1, maintaining headcount? Yes, absolutely. I believe that that's not going to change. 2, maintaining average payroll amount? Yep, I don't believe that's going to change either. 3, if monies commissions were owed to a provider prior to COVID-19, can PPP funds be used to pay that provider all or some of their owed commissions? No, don't do it. Question, what happens to the leftover money? Okay, that's really up for discussion. What can happen to the leftover money? I'm going to get to that in a minute. Do I have to give it back to the bank immediately? I am focusing on forgiveness, and I'm going to actually do an entire webinar on this whole issue. Some banks are saying you can keep the money and you can pay out through you can pay out as long as it is an allowed expense. But to me, you're basically, are you committing fraud because you took a loan in which you knew you could not use that money during the 8 weeks, right? Next question, does that affect your chances of it being forgiven? No, you still have to meet the 75% payroll for it to even be considered. And the documentation, all that stuff. Does my 1% interest apply to the whole loan or just the part that was used? Well, that's also a big debate on, is your 1% starts the day that you received your loan. But if any portion of your loan is forgiven, do you have to pay 1% interest on that forgiven amount? So I would say if you are forgiven 0, 100%, you're going to have to pay that 1%. Like you are definitely going to pay the 1%. But the other is up for discussion, and I just don't know. What are the rules on contract employee wages being forgiven under the PPP loan? Can't do it. Question, if there were changes in employees, are you obligated to match them one-on-one with regards to job titles and duties? And I really like this question because no, you don't. You can let an attorney who was working at your firm go and then hire a secretary. You do not have to have the same duties. It is only the full-time equivalent that you had between February 15th and June 30th of last year. Oh, at this point, I believe that is the end of my questions. And I know that there are going to be some other questions that are going to be asked, and I will have no problem answering those. I will say, if you have questions, and again, there's a lot of things up in the air that we're all not sure about. It's very nerve-wracking for everybody, including myself, because sometimes you hate to, as a lawyer, say, I don't know, or it's unclear yet. So if you want a consultation, call our law firm. We give consultations. They last about an hour. And just ask us your opinions about your specific situation. I wish you guys all the best of luck, and I will see you next week for the next webinar.